My name is Emily Tran, and this was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My wedding day, white dress, perfect lighting, smiles from people I hadn't spoken to in years, everyone clapping, laughing, toasting, except me. I was sitting there still as a statue, smiling like I was taught to smile, polite, tight controlled. Then my father stood up, glass in hand, voice full of pride. Not for me? No. For the groom, he said, after years of questionable choices, I'm relieved my daughter finally married up. He laughed. Everyone else laughed too. I laughed. But inside I was dying. Because that wasn't a joke. That was my life. That was my place in this family. The disappointment they dressed up for photos. You see, I was raised to be quiet, good, obedient, grateful. Grateful for scraps of praise. Grateful for being tolerated. When I was 7, I won my first spelling bee. I ran home beaming, holding my tiny plastic trophy like it was made of gold. I said, "Daddy, look, I won." He said, "That's nice. Go get your brother, he's late for piano." That was the moment I learned something important. In my house, achievement didn't matter. Not if it came from me. Because I was the daughter. The placeholder. The one who would grow up, change her name, and be someone else's problem. My brother. He was the future, the one they bragged about. The one with potential. Me. I was the support act. No matter what I did, perfect grades, scholarships, early graduation, it was never enough. Because I wasn't him. Because I wasn't quiet enough. Because I asked too many questions. So I stopped asking. I became what they wanted, invisible. Then I met Ryan. And for a brief moment, I thought maybe I was finally getting it right. He was polished, well-connected, came from a respectable family. My dad loved him. My mom said he'll take care of you. I never asked who would take care of me from him. So I said yes. And here we are, back at that table, back at that moment. My father raising a toast not to me, but to the man I was marrying. Not to my kindness. Not to my strength. Not to the years I held myself together when this family tried to tear me down. No, he toasted the fact that I had married up, as if my value finally existed because of someone else's last name. And that's when something broke. I looked around the room at all the faces who had smiled at me all evening. People who didn't know me, didn't care to. They were just here for the open bar and to say, "You looked beautiful." And suddenly I realized I didn't want to be beautiful. I wanted to be real. I didn't want to be silent. I wanted to be heard. So I stood up. I didn't know what I was going to say. I just knew I couldn't sit there and let that be the story told about me. Not again. Not ever. My name is Emily Tran, and I'm not here to be small. When I was 8, I asked my father if he was proud of me. I'll never forget his answer. He didn't say no. He didn't say yes either. He said, "Why would you ask something like that?" As if the question itself was offensive. That was the first time I realized pride in our house wasn't given freely. It was reserved, selective, and in our family it had only one recipient. My brother. He was the golden child, the firstborn, the one who could do no wrong. Even when he failed, he was learning. When I succeeded, I was just lucky. He wasn't smarter than me. He wasn't kinder. But he had something I didn't. He fit the image. He was loud, confident, always surrounded by people who adored him. He played sports, played piano, dated cheerleaders. And me, I was the quiet one with books, the girl who ate lunch alone sometimes by choice, who preferred computer labs to parties. My father used to say, "Your brother is going places." And when I got accepted into a top university on a full scholarship, he said, "Make sure you don't waste it chasing hobbies." I remember staring at him, waiting for the words. "I'm proud of you." They never came. But they came for my brother always. When he got a B, he got a high five. When I got an A+, I got silence. Maybe a nod if he was feeling generous. It was strange growing up in the same house but feeling like a guest. Like you were just temporary. He got the new car. I got hand-me-downs. He got his own room, his own space. I shared with storage boxes. I kept thinking, if I just work harder, maybe he'll see me. So I did. I won academic decathlons, placed in national math competitions, coded websites at 13. I got a job at 15, paid for my own laptop, paid for my own books. And still, he said, Why are you trying so hard to impress people? But I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just trying to matter. To someone. To him. You know the worst part. My brother wasn't cruel. He didn't mock me. He didn't tear me down. He just didn't notice. And sometimes that kind of invisibility hurts more than hate. Because you can fight cruelty. But how do you fight being nothing? Years later, when I launched my startup, I didn't tell him. When it made its first 6 figures, I didn't tell anyone. And when it was acquired, I sat alone in my apartment, drank a glass of champagne I bought myself, and stared at my phone, wondering if I should call him. I didn't, because by then I finally understood. I didn't need his pride. I didn't need his approval. I just needed to stop chasing ghosts. But there's still a little girl in me, still standing in that hallway holding her trophy, watching her brother get all the praise again. And maybe, just maybe, that girl was still sitting at the wedding table, waiting. They called me obedient. They said I was easy, that I never talked back, never caused drama, never questioned the rules. What they didn't realize was that I was rebelling the entire time, just not in ways they could see. I didn't slam doors. I didn't sneak out at night. I didn't scream at the dinner table. No, I rebelled in silence, in my mind. In my notebooks, in the way I listened to every word and remembered what hurt. When they said I wasn't leadership material, I taught myself how to code. When they said, "That's not for girls," I signed up anyway. When they said I couldn't do it alone, I did. I didn't need to shout. My rebellion was slower, quieter, but deeper. It started late at night when everyone was asleep. While the rest of the house went dark, I'd sit under the glow of my laptop screen, learning how to build something from nothing. HTML, JavaScript, APIs, front end, back end. I didn't even know what I was building at first. I just knew that every line of code was a sentence they'd never hear. My own private language. I didn't post about it. Didn't tell my friends. Didn't show my parents. Why would I? They didn't ask. They never asked. And if I had told them, I already knew what they'd say. That's nice. But when are you going to focus on something real? So I stayed quiet. But I kept building. Every night I carved out space for myself where no one could interrupt. No one could criticize. No one could take credit. There was power in that silence. It didn't feel like much at first, but it was mine. That was the beginning of something bigger. Not a company. Not a movement. A promise. That one day, I would stop living on the edges of other people's lives. That one day, I'd stop asking for permission to be seen. His name was Daniel. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't from a powerful family. He didn't have a 5-year plan or a polished elevator pitch. But when he looked at me, he actually saw me. Not the version I rehearsed. Not the polite, composed girl I wore to every family dinner. Just me. It was the first time I ever felt chosen, not for being impressive, not for being quiet, just for being real. We met in a coffee shop near campus. I was studying. He was sketching something on a napkin. He asked me if I wanted to see. I said no, but I smiled, and he laughed. That's how it started. He'd walk me home after class, wait for me outside the lab even when I stayed too long. He never rushed me, never told me to relax or smile more. He asked questions, and actually listened to the answers. And for the first time, I let someone in. We'd stay up talking until 3 a.m. about stupid things. Movies, regrets, childhood dreams. He told me I was brilliant. I told him no one ever said that to me before. He didn't understand. He said, "What do you mean? You don't see it?" I laughed. And maybe for a moment I did. But good things don't last in houses like mine. One night I brought Daniel home. He wore his best shirt, shook my father's hand, said, "It's really nice to meet you, sir." My father looked him up and down like he was checking the price tag on something too cheap. Later that night, he pulled me aside and said, "You can do better. Don't waste your time with someone who can't offer you anything. Offer me what?" He had kindness, patience, the ability to make me feel like I mattered. But that wasn't valuable in my father's world. To him, Daniel was a dead end, an embarrassment, another poor decision from a daughter he didn't trust to choose for herself. So I was given a choice. Either focus on your future, or give it up for a boy who won't be around in 5 years. And like every choice I was ever offered, It came wrapped in fear. Fear of losing my family. Fear of being called selfish. Fear of being cast out again. So I let Daniel go. I told him I needed space. That it wasn't working. That I was too busy. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the girl who was speaking. And maybe he didn't. Because I wasn't breaking up with him. I was breaking up with the only version of myself that had ever felt loved. I cried the whole night. But no one heard. Because no one asked. And by morning, I was back to being the girl who obeyed. Again. After Daniel, I shut everything down. Feelings. Distractions. Hope. I buried it all beneath work, ambition, and silence. Because if I couldn't be loved, I could at least be respected. Or feared. That's when I started building. Not a company. Not at first. Just space. Digital space where no one could touch me. No father telling me I wasn't enough. No relationships hanging by approval. Just code. Structure. Logic. And me. I'd come home from school, eat dinner in silence, nod through my parents' questions, then go upstairs and disappear into a screen. I didn't tell them what I was working on. They wouldn't understand anyway. They thought I was wasting time, that I was being antisocial, that I was just playing with computers. But I was building something they couldn't see. At first, it was just a platform for freelance artists to sell digital prints. Nothing big, nothing flashy. But people started signing up, then paying, then referring others. I reinvested every dollar, taught myself branding, UX, SEO, ads, taxes. I became my own team of 10, and no one knew. I'd eat breakfast like nothing had changed while my inbox filled with revenue reports. I'd sit at family dinners listening to my dad praise my brother's job at a consulting firm, while my app quietly passed 6 figures in profit. And still, I said nothing, because part of me still thought it wasn't real. Because part of me still craved hearing "I'm proud of you," not from the market, but from the man who never believed in me. I remember the night the acquisition offer came in. $3, 8 million. Clean. Direct. No games. I stared at the email for 5 minutes. Then 10. Then 2 hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even smile. I just shut the laptop and turned off the light. I laid there in the dark, wondering how something so big could feel so small when you have no one to tell. Because here's the truth. I didn't build that company out of passion. I built it out of spite, out of silence, out of the years I spent waiting to be seen. And when I got everything I was supposed to want, freedom, validation, power, all I wanted was to sit across from my father and finally say, I did it. Without you. But I didn't, because even then, I still didn't believe I was allowed to speak. His name was Ryan. And no, I didn't fall in love with him. I fell in line. He was everything my father ever wanted in a man. Tall, educated, polished. From a family that hosted fundraisers and played golf on Sundays. He shook hands with confidence, wore custom suits, spoke in a tone that always sounded like he was making a deal. My father met him once and said, "That's the kind of man who knows where he's going." As if that made him the right destination for me. Ryan was nice enough. He opened doors, paid for dinner, complimented my outfits, but he never asked about my work, never asked what I wanted, never looked at me like I was someone with fire in her chest. He looked at me like I was a resume line, beautiful, educated, safe. That was what I'd become, a box checked on someone else's list. At first I told myself it was fine, that this was just how adult relationships worked. That love was for the movies and compatibility was what mattered. He had a good job, a good family, a good smile. We were good, but I wasn't happy. I was quiet, smaller, more agreeable. The kind of woman who laughed at jokes she didn't find funny and asked questions she didn't care about just to keep the peace. I didn't tell Ryan about the company I sold. I didn't tell him about the money, the success, the independence I fought for. Because deep down, I already knew. He didn't want someone powerful. He wanted someone presentable. Someone he could introduce as my wife, Emily. She used to work in tech. Used to, like ambition was something to grow out of. My mother saw it before I did. One night, she sat next to me on the porch and said, "He's a good man. But that doesn't mean he's your man." I asked her what she meant. She just looked down at her hands and said, Sometimes we marry men our fathers admire, instead of the ones who see us. I didn't reply, because I knew she was speaking from experience. And yet, when Ryan proposed, I said yes, not because I was excited, but because I was exhausted, because I thought maybe this was what being chosen felt like, because I thought maybe, if I gave my father the wedding he wanted, he would finally say the words I waited my whole life to hear. You made the right choice. But the thing about choices made for peace, they never bring it, not for long. They say every bride cries when she finds the one. The dress, I mean, but I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just stared at myself in the mirror, in a gown picked by someone else, in a boutique chosen by my future mother-in-law, surrounded by women who didn't really know me. They all gasped. They said things like, "Oh, Emily, it's perfect. You look stunning. Ryan's going to lose his mind." But none of them asked how I felt. And I didn't volunteer the truth, because the truth was, I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. She looked polished, elegant, but not powerful, not free. She looked like someone playing a role. And I had been playing that role for so long, I didn't know where the costume ended, and I began. That dress, it fit my body, but not my life. It hugged my shape, but suffocated my soul. I remember tugging at the sleeves, wondering if I could breathe in it for more than an hour, wondering how many other brides stood like this, smiling through panic, performing joy. Everyone said the same thing. You're so lucky. You're marrying into such a great family. You're going to be taken care of. Taken care of, like I was fragile, delicate, breakable. They didn't know I'd already broken, 100 times in silence. They didn't know I'd built something from scratch, that I had money in 3 countries, that I had dreams no one had dared ask about, because none of that mattered here, in this room, in this dress. I wasn't a builder or a fighter or a survivor. I was just a bride, a quiet girl in white. And the closer the wedding got, the more invisible I felt. People planned the seating chart, the menu, the speeches, without me. They debated centerpieces and color palettes while I sat in the corner smiling politely. Every decision was made for me, and the few times I spoke up, they called me tense, said I needed to relax, to trust the process. But here's the truth: no one tells you. When everything about your life is curated by someone else, you start to forget how to want things. You start to believe that silence is love, that shrinking is grace, that obedience is maturity. So I zipped up the dress, bit down on every feeling, and nodded along. Because that's what I was taught to do. Because the dress didn't have to fit my heart, just the picture. The morning of my wedding, I woke up before the sun, not from excitement, from heaviness. The kind that sits on your chest, not your shoulders, like your body knows something your brain isn't ready to admit. I stared at the ceiling and thought, this is it. This is the day I disappear. The house was already buzzing. Hairstylists, photographers, florists, moving like a production crew. Smiles rehearsed. Cameras clicking. Everyone kept saying, "Are you ready? Are you excited? Today's your day." But it didn't feel like my day. It felt like I was watching someone else's life happen from behind glass. Like I was just following stage directions in a role written by someone else. Ryan arrived at the venue with his parents. They shook hands, posed for photos, exchanged compliments with my father like business partners. The guests trickled in. Old family friends, people I hadn't seen in years. All of them said the same thing. You look beautiful. Beautiful, not happy, not strong. Just beautiful like an ornament. The ceremony went by in a blur. Vows, rings, applause, a kiss I don't remember. Then came the reception. That was when it all started to unravel. I sat at the head table surrounded by noise but completely alone. Everyone was laughing, toasting, dancing. I looked out at the sea of guests and I realized something. Not a single person in that room truly knew me. Not my dreams, not my fears, not what I had built, not what I had lost. They knew the version of me that smiled, nodded, obeyed. That version was easy to love, safe. I watched my father across the room glowing with pride, shaking hands, holding court. He wasn't proud of me. He was proud of the image, the performance, the product of years of shaping a daughter into a trophy. And Ryan, He fit right into it, smiling, charming, telling stories about his job, his goals, his plans, never once asking how I felt. Not that day. Not ever. At one point, a family friend came over and said, "You're lucky, Emily. You caught a good one." Caught. Like I was fishing, like I had snagged something rare and valuable and should feel grateful I didn't scare it away. I just smiled. But inside something snapped because I realized I wasn't lucky. I was trapped. Trapped in a life I had built from silence, in a room full of people clapping for a version of me that never existed. And then, the sound of a spoon tapping against a champagne glass. My father was about to speak. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a spoon against glass echoed through the room. The laughter softened. The music faded. All eyes turned toward my father. He stood tall, confident, comfortable, like this moment was made for him. He raised his glass, smiling like a man who owned the room. And then he began. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "tonight is a very special night. Not just because our families are coming together, but because, well, my daughter finally got it right." The room chuckled. I froze. He continued. "Now those of you who know Emily, you know, she's always had strong opinions. Let's just say she's marched to the beat of her own drum sometimes to questionable results." Louder laughter. I felt Ryan's hand slide over mine under the table. It wasn't comfort. It was control. A signal. Smile. Stay still. Let it pass. My father raised his eyebrows. "But look at her now. Beautiful. Married. To a man from a family we deeply admire." Then he looked straight at Ryan and said, "Thank you, son, for grounding her, for helping her see the right path. We're grateful she finally married up." The words hit me like cold water. Married up. Like I was the project. Like I was the unstable one who needed fixing. Like my worth had finally arrived because of someone else's last name. I looked around the room. People were laughing, clapping, nodding. And I was disappearing. Again. I forced a smile, tilted my head just right, pretended to be flattered, but my chest was burning. Because I had spent my entire life being quiet, polite, patient, and still, I wasn't enough. Not unless I was standing next to someone they approved of. Not unless I was reduced to a bride in a white dress, smiling, silent, acceptable. That moment felt endless. The applause, the smiles, the sound of my father drinking to my submission. But something in me shifted. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was a quiet clarity. The kind that comes when a line has been crossed so many times. There's finally nothing left to protect. I looked down at my plate, my untouched food, my trembling hands, and then I looked at the mic. Just sitting there, waiting, and for the first time in my life, so was I. I don't remember standing up. My body moved before my brain caught up. One moment I was sitting smiling through the sting. The next my chair scraped against the floor and a few heads turned. Ryan whispered, "Emily, where are you going?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because I wasn't going anywhere. I was finally arriving. My heels clicked against the floor like a countdown. Each step toward the microphone felt like I was shedding a skin I had worn my whole life. The girl who stayed silent. The daughter who smiled through insults. The woman who made herself smaller just to survive in rooms like this. Gone. I reached the mic and took a breath. Not the kind you take before a performance. The kind you take before you jump. The room quieted. Forks stopped moving. Chatter faded. Even the band paused, sensing something was about to happen. I looked out over a sea of familiar faces. Aunts, uncles, coworkers, classmates, all dressed for a celebration they thought they understood. I looked at Ryan. He gave me a tight, nervous smile, the kind people wear when they're trying to control an outcome without saying a word. Then I looked at my father. He was already shaking his head. A small, subtle warning. Don't. But I was done taking directions. I took another breath. And when I finally spoke, my voice was steady. I wasn't planning to speak tonight. But then again, I wasn't planning to spend my wedding day being reminded that no matter what I do, it will never be enough for some people in this room. You could feel the air shift. Chairs creaked. People glanced around, unsure if this was a speech or a storm. I've been quiet for 28 years. I've smiled through shame, laughed through pain, and thanked people who never saw me as anything more than an inconvenience or a burden with good posture. My voice didn't shake, because I had rehearsed these words for years, in my head, in the shower, on long drives. Every time I walked away from a room with tears, I never let anyone see. But silence is not grace. Obedience is not peace. And being chosen by a man you approve of does not erase everything I've done without him. I looked straight at my father. He wasn't smiling now, and for the first time in my life, neither was I. I looked at my father and said the one thing I had never dared to say out loud. You taught me that being loved was something I had to earn, that I was only worth celebrating when I was silent, obedient, convenient. The room froze. A few people shifted in their seats. Some looked at each other unsure if this was a meltdown or a moment. It was neither. It was a reckoning. You praised my brother for breathing. I built a company from scratch, and you didn't even ask me what it was called. More murmurs. Ryan's mother put her wine glass down. My father opened his mouth to interrupt, but I kept going. You told me no man wants a woman who's too ambitious. So I built something in secret, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew you'd try to take it from me. I scanned the crowd. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Every word landed like glass on concrete. You said I finally married up? I turned to face Ryan. But you don't even know what I'm worth. He blinked. Confused. Embarrassed. Maybe even a little afraid. Good? I sold my company last year. $3.8 million. The room gasped. Some jaws dropped. Others tried to recover, pretending they knew all along. Ryan's face went pale. My father's smile cracked like old porcelain. And me. I stood there breathing for the first time in years. I didn't marry up. He did. And I didn't say yes because I needed saving. I said yes because I thought that's what daughters do. They give their fathers something to be proud of, even if it kills them in the process. The room was silent. You could hear nothing but heartbeats and disbelief. And in that silence, I finally heard something else. My own voice. Clear, steady, unapologetic. For once, I wasn't performing. I was telling the truth. There was a moment just after I said it. I didn't marry up. He did. When time stopped, no one moved. No one spoke. It was like the room itself was holding its breath. And then one slow clap. From the back of the room. It wasn't sarcastic. It was real. Then another. Then a few more. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to tell me I wasn't alone anymore. Ryan stood up, trying to save face. He laughed, forced tight. Put a hand on my shoulder like he was trying to bring me back down. Emily, come on. Let's not turn this into something it's not. I turned to him, looked him straight in the eye. You didn't ask who I was. You asked if I'd fit. And I did. For a while. But now I don't. He opened his mouth, but I shook my head. This is your wedding too, Ryan. But it's not your story. It's mine. And I'm taking it back. He stepped back. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked small. And maybe I did too. Once. But not anymore. I turned back to the mic. To everyone who clapped when he said I married up, I hope you think about what that really means. That a woman's value still depends on the man next to her. That success only counts when it's visible to you. That silence is more comfortable than truth. I paused. Then I did something no one expected. I took off my shoes, right there in front of everyone, and I stepped away from the mic, barefoot, still in my dress, but free. I walked across the reception hall, past the champagne flutes, the camera phones, the carefully placed floral arrangements. I passed my father, who couldn't look me in the eye, my mother, who did and finally nodded, and Ryan, who was still trying to process what had just happened. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I just walked, because I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving in power. And they would remember that long after the music faded. The first step was the hardest, not because I doubted myself, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking toward anyone's approval. I was walking away from it. Away from a father who only praised what he could control. Away from a marriage built on silence and performance. Away from a version of myself I no longer recognized. The room behind me didn't erupt. It didn't stop me either. It just watched. Some people stared in disbelief. Others whispered, A few even smiled quietly like they understood. My heels dangled from my fingers. My train dragged softly behind me. And with each step I felt lighter. Not because it was easy, because it was true. I passed the table with our name cards. The slideshow of childhood photos. The guest book full of messages like wishing you a life of happiness together. But no one wished me happiness alone. No one ever thought that might be enough. I reached the exit. The air outside was colder than I expected. It bit at my skin sharp and clear, but I welcomed it, because for the first time in years, I could breathe. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I'd sleep that night, didn't care what tomorrow looked like. All I knew was that I had walked out of something that would have slowly erased me. And that was enough. No one followed me. No one called my name. That silence, it wasn't empty. It was mine. I thought there would be chaos. Phone calls, shouting, demands to come back. But instead, there was nothing. Just silence for hours. No missed calls, no messages, no questions. Just me in a borrowed hotel robe, watching the city lights blink through a rain-speckled window, wondering if the storm was over, or if it had only just begun. Around midnight, my phone finally buzzed. One message from my brother. 3 words. I get it. I stared at the screen for a long time. We hadn't spoken much in the last year. He was always the favored one. The good son, the one who never questioned, never challenged. But maybe he saw it now. Maybe for once he saw me. A few minutes later, another message came in. This one, from my mom. She didn't say much either. Just a photo. It was one I'd never seen before. Me around age 10 asleep at a desk. Piles of books around me, a pencil still in my hand. And her message said, "You were always more than they allowed you to be." I'm sorry it took me this long. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't moved, but because there were no tears left. Only breath, only space. The next morning I checked the news, not the headlines, just social media, whispers, speculation, a few grainy clips from the wedding. Some people called it brave, others said dramatic. Some stayed silent, not knowing whose side to take. But none of it mattered, because for the first time, I wasn't watching the world and wondering where I belonged in it. I had chosen. I wasn't someone's daughter, or someone's bride, or someone's second choice. I was Emily. No title, no permission, no apology, just me. And strangely, that felt like everything. My name is Emily Tran, and this is how I ended the story they wrote for me. I used to think freedom would feel like fireworks, like running away screaming, never looking back. But real freedom feels quiet, like sitting alone in a small apartment, eating dinner at midnight from a paper container, no makeup, no dress, no one watching. And finally, feeling peace. It's not glamorous. It's not viral, but it's real. People still ask what happened. They say things like, "I heard you walked out of your wedding. I heard you embarrassed your family. I heard you snapped." Let them hear whatever they want. The truth. I didn't snap. I woke up. For 28 years, I lived by someone else's version of success. I followed the rules. Smiled when I was hurting. Bowed when I wanted to scream. But silence is not grace. Shrinking is not love. And obedience is not peace. I thought being chosen by someone would finally make me enough. But the day I chose myself, that's the day I became unstoppable. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if love will find me again. If my family will ever truly understand. If the world will forgive a woman for walking out when she was expected to stay. But I do know this. I would rather be alone in my truth than surrounded in a lie. So if you're listening, if you've ever been silenced, overlooked, dismissed, this story is yours too. Take your voice back. Start over. Even if your hands shake, even if your voice trembles, because you deserve more than survival. You deserve to live. If this story spoke to something inside you, subscribe, share. Let someone else feel seen today. Your voice matters, and it's time to use it.